It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Geoengineering is worth the risk, provided we regulate it properly. That's a new headline from thefinancialtimes.com and others. An avalanche of bad news breaking headlines in a moment, the kind that Matrix Media doesn't mention. But first, let's stop and ponder this Financial Times report. Geoengineering is worth the risk. So says the money printers and the manipulators of media, the military, and the Matrix as a whole. Here's my question. Worth the risk to who? Certainly not to populations or life on Earth. And how much longer can Matrix Media continue to pretend that global climate intervention operations are nothing more than a last chance option that we might need to deploy someday? While anyone but the clinically blind should easily be able to see and recognize what's going on in our skies. But unfortunately, even now, the majority can't or won't. All those that are courageously fighting to expose climate engineering operations know this all too well, that the majority still refuse to see, recognize, or acknowledge the atmospheric spraying atrocities for a number of reasons, starting with the fact that Matrix Media sources and Matrix-controlled so-called science experts tell the public that they aren't actually seeing what they're seeing. But the so-called experts say if climate engineering, aka solar radiation management operations, were deployed, weather warfare, it would look exactly like what we're already seeing. No more blue skies, silvery white at best. Lingering, spreading, and dispersing jet-sprayed geoengineering particulate trails that blot out the skies, temporarily and toxically lowering some daytime temperatures while also trapping heat on Earth's surface, which makes the overall warming of the planet even worse, not better. Not to mention totally disrupting the global hydrological cycle, destroying the ozone layer, an extremely near-term existential threat in and of itself, and completely contaminating the entire planet along with every breath we take. So back to the new report from the Financial Times. Geoengineering is worth the risk, provided we regulate it properly. Really, regulate to fulfill whose agendas and whose objectives. Next question, is the Financial Times conclusion, which is like saying intentionally blowing a hole in the bottom of our already sinking ship, aka planet Earth, in order to make it float better, is worth it? In order to save us from ourselves? That it's a good idea? It's, quote, worth the risk, they say? And how many in the ranks of the human race, in the halls of academia and media and populations, are willing to pretend that the Financial Times conclusion has validity, that geoengineering is, quote, worth the risk? Here's another question. How's it all working out so far after 75 years of ongoing and constantly ramped up climate engineering operations, and the vast majority remain willfully clueless, pursuing personal entertainment or pleasure, pretending the elections are something more than scripted theater, and trying to pacify themselves with the far too often entertained notion that just thinking happy thoughts will make the tidal wave looming over our collective heads magically go away? That's not going to happen. The only way forward is to fully face the gathering storm head on. And yes, I do know how many will likely change the channel about now. That's not in my control. My post is to sound the alarm on data-based conclusions, no matter how dire those conclusions are. The multi-layered epidemic of the reality challenged and the morally bankrupt and the hopelessly apathetic in the planetary asylum need to be awakened. They need to summon their courage and join the fight for all that matters while we still have anything left to salvage. Short of this, our next stop on the current course is planetary omnicide. And to those that still believe such a rant is just alarmism, or that the filth we so clearly see being spewed into our skies is just harmless jet exhaust, please, I'm asking you, I'm begging you, abandon ideology, preconceptions, and bias. Please, please conduct an objective research investigation and respond accordingly. We are almost out of time. And any still clinging to the false notion that those in power wouldn't do this to us, let alone to themselves, think again. This is exactly who they are. And the fact that the money printers control the narrative, again with Matrix Media, means that they can and usually do make many believe whatever they want them to believe about everything from conflict zones, tragic events here at home that serve as mass distraction whenever they need those events to occur. And always they seem to have had prior knowledge of the perpetrators of those events, but never did anything. They just let it happen. And about climate engineering, or more specifically, the denial of it. For the record, my criticisms of public apathy and denial don't apply to populations of third world nations, most of which are just trying to survive another day, while what's left of their countries continues to be looted, pillaged, and plundered for the remaining resources that are the lifeblood of empire, spreading so-called freedom and democracy at gunpoint. So many of the challenges we now face are a direct result of overshoot on countless fronts. From the Oxford Dictionary definition, overshoot, go past a point unintentionally, especially through traveling too fast or being unable to stop. Yes, unable to stop. That's the core conundrum of so-called industrialized, militarized society, aka self-extermination. To stop would be collapse, and not to stop is definitely collapse, which we're about to experience. The planet has now been all but destroyed in the process of so-called progress. Now over 8 billion humans all cut up and trying to get their piece of the pie. And again, I fully realize that no one wants to hear this. But the truth, however bitter a pill, needs to be heard. Again, the hallmark of a healthy mind is an unyielding willingness to face the truth, however dire and disturbing that truth is, however much it goes against the grain of programming, ideology, and bias, all of which must be broken down. The lens must be cleared. We must see the horizon through a clear lens, or we have zero chance of altering our current course. On this theme of biosphere collapse, look up, try not to breathe, eat, or drink. New from the New York Times, something's poisoning America's land. Farmers fear forever chemicals. Here's my question. Is the public being told the truth about all the primary sources of such contamination? Does that question even deserve an answer? Back to the report from the New York Times. Fertilizer made from city sewage, what a brilliant idea that is, has been spread on millions of acres of farmland for decades. Scientists say it can contain high levels of toxic substances. For decades, the report says farmers across America have been encouraged by the federal government to spread municipal sewage on millions of acres of farmland as fertilizer because it's rich in nutrients and it helped keep the sludge out of the landfills. Rich in a lot more than just nutrients. But the report says a growing body of research shows that this black sludge made from sewage that flows from homes and factories can contain heavy concentrations of chemicals. Who could have imagined that? And the so-called experts are just now figuring this out. Chemicals thought to increase the risk of certain types of cancer, to cause birth defects and developmental delays in children, known as forever chemicals, that's PFAS chemicals. Because of their longevity, these toxic contaminants are now being detected even at high levels on farmlands across the country. There are now lawsuits against providers of the fertilizer, the report continues, as well as against the Environmental Protection Agency, alleging that the agency failed to regulate the chemicals, again known as PFAS. Final statement from this report. Investigating PFAS is like opening Pandora's box. Okay, let's stop there. First, about the PFAS forever chemicals, they are not just showing up in our food and water from the sewage that is mind-numbingly being dumped on farm fields for fertilizer. Here's a reminder report from Euronews.com. Rainwater everywhere on Earth unsafe to drink due to PFAS forever chemicals. Ubiquitous contamination all over the planet, ubiquitous atmospheric aerosol dispersions all over the planet. Any connection? You decide. And about the so-called public protection agencies like EPA, as I have pointed out so many times on this broadcast, all available evidence makes clear over many decades that such agencies exist more often than not to hide the most dire threats from the public, not to disclose them. So this question, if toxic sewer sludge has been routinely used to fertilize our food for decades, is it a reach to consider that testing indicates toxic coal fly ash has been routinely used as a base material for covert climate engineering operations? For the record, the chemical signatures do match. Parallel scenarios: disposing of all the toxic sewage by dumping it on farm fields, disposing of all the toxic fly ash by spraying it into our skies, and calling it solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection, cloud albedo enhancement. Put a scientific name on this kind of criminal practice and pretend it's okay. Or pretend that it's just a proposal, no matter how shockingly visible it is. Business as usual for the criminal cartels that masquerade as legitimate governments, all funded by the money printers. Question: how many agendas and objectives could they accomplish by fly ash dispersions under the guise of solar radiation management operations? Weather warfare, temporary toxic masking of skyrocketing daytime temperatures, controlling food supplies while contaminating them simultaneously, controlling populations by literally diminishing their health and cognitive function. Are elements like aluminum nanoparticles in fly ash? Yes. Is such bioavailable aluminum showing up in rain testing all over the world? Yes, in copious quantities. Is bioavailable aluminum toxic to all life forms with no exceptions? Yes again. On that note of not-so-good cheer, this is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the End of the World as We Know It broadcast, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of global climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. Reaching a critical mass of awareness is the only way forward in this fight. And we can, and certainly we must reach a critical mass of awareness by starting a conversation on climate engineering that leads people to a credible source of data. Credibility is key. Geoengineeringwatch.org will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. Help kickstart a conversation on climate engineering with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials, which are available on our homepage, and our full-color, glossy printed materials we pass on for less than our cost of printing and distributing. Our only goal, to sound the alarm while it can still make a difference. For Michael Snyder, this: an extinction-level threat is poised to dramatically reduce the global population, and most people have absolutely no idea how completely on target that statement is. He continues, we are literally killing ourselves and everything around us, and most people don't even know that this is happening. But even if we could get everyone to understand the extinction-level threat that we are facing, would they change their behavior? Question mark. The answer to that question has been clear so far: no. The vast majority are unfortunately not yet willing to alter their behavior or their delusional conclusions of reality. This is not a political statement in any way, shape, or form. I'm talking about all sides of the orchestrated political divide. Though the coming collapse of our current reality will force many to awaken, we can't afford to wait till that moment. We must speed up the process of reaching a critical mass of awareness. All those who are already awake, aware, and fully facing the wider horizon are needed in the effort. We're playing the greatest game of chess. Learn how to play well. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific instructions on how to help move this fight forward. Next, from the New York Post, Kim Jong-un executes 30 officials over floods in North Korea that killed 4,000. From the Post report, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un allegedly ordered the execution of 20 to 30 officials over their failure to prevent July's deadly flooding. Here's a question. Prevent the flooding how? Yes, we're officially told that the Korean leader was referring to directing floodwaters in a better manner, but could climate engineering operations gone wrong be the actual core to this equation? Think about it. All nations are actively or passively participating. That's the bottom line. It cannot be otherwise. We have U.S. Senate documents, 800 pages long, that refers to this international cooperation, even between, quote, otherwise adversarial nations because of the cross-border ramifications. Of course, they're all involved, not just in climate engineering, other social engineering on many levels. Not hard to fill that blank in either. Continuing from the New York Times, record rainfall spoils crops in China, rattling its leaders. After weeks of drought, farmers in the typically arid agricultural belt in northern China were ill-prepared for the torrential rain that inundated fields earlier this summer and decimated their crops. Again, control the weather, control the food supply, control populations, control the world. The Times report continues with this. While climate change, they say, is upending food supply chains everywhere, it is a particularly sensitive issue in China where famines have historically led to unrest and leaders have long made food security a top priority. For the record, the hallmarks of climate engineering: drought, deluge scenarios, food security being rapidly eroded, conflict coming. Is that in fact the goal, the objective, the agenda for so many in these circles of power? Isn't it perplexing that many of those who claim to be against the endless list of power structure crimes, including the atrocities in our skies, simultaneously wave their banners in full support of official narratives surrounding controller-orchestrated conflict zones all over the world? Yes, perplexing, selective morality. Wide is the road, as the proverb states, and so very many are following it, the wrong road. In times of global peace, sons bury their fathers. In times of war, fathers bury their sons. Who are those behind the curtain that are the ultimate manipulators of countless conflict zones in order to fulfill various objectives and agendas that are not so hard to see for any that don't have their eyes wide shut? Back to the deluge part of the climate engineering drought deluge scenarios. From the Weather Channel climate engineering cover-up crew, record rainfall traps cars, cuts power in Florida. The report says in a deluge that broke records, floodwaters swept across Florida, stranding cars, submerging roads, and forcing drivers to white-knuckle their way to safety. Yes, the record-shattering warm Gulf of Mexico, where the oil infrastructure so far is spared again and again and again from any hurricanes that could cause significant damage to the platforms. Just an amazing recurring coincidence over and over? You decide. And for those that believe interfering with the planet's attempt to cool itself, aka cyclonic rotations over the ocean, is a good idea, please revisit that false conclusion before Earth turns into a true sister planet to Venus. We are on track right now for what is known as Venus syndrome, and no, it's not a metaphor. Please search geoengineeringwatch.org Venus syndrome. And as impossible as that sounds and seems to so many, we have never, ever been here before. The Earth changes that are currently occurring are happening hundreds of times faster than any epoch in Earth's geologic past. All mass extinctions happened far slower than this, all of them. Consider that, and the faster it happens, the worse it is. People that think that there's some magic thermostat to keep this planet livable, habitable, think again. Not the case. From phys.org, Amazon rainforest fires produce secondary ultrafine particles that may affect weather and climate. Wow, ponder that one. Quote, ultrafine particles, aka nanoparticles that might affect weather and climate. Here's a question. Are the nanoparticles really all just from the smoke? Because certainly we know that's harmful, but is that the only source? View the geoengineeringwatch.org groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, available on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for free. And in this film, Geoengineering Watch recorded blanket grid pattern atmospheric aerosols spraying directly above the Paradise Fire smoke canopy. And whatever that was about, it's not benevolent. The science report continues. Particles in wildfire smoke can lower air quality and harm human health. Smoke aerosols can also influence weather and climate by modifying cloud formation and changing how much of the sun's energy is reflected or absorbed by the atmosphere. Imagine that. Sounds just like solar radiation management, doesn't it? Search this title, Wildfires Serve Geoengineering Agenda, to learn much more. Much more, in fact, than most want to know. But we need to know, all of us need to know, how wildfires fit into the geoengineering agenda and their facilitating of the conditions, their creating of the conditions that allow these fires to burn with such ferocity. Source of ignition, separate subject completely. And please, when searching this title, Wildfires Serve Geoengineering Agenda, or any other Geoengineering Watch anything, please use a search engine other than Google. Again, they are doing their absolute best to censor anything, everything, from our source. Final excerpt from this science report. These ultrafine particles may intensify storm clouds and heavy rain. Well, there you have it. Nothing to see here. Don't look up at those lingering, spreading, geoengineering jet dispersions, even if they're directly above firestorm smoke canopies. It's just the wildfire smoke causing the weather chaos. Right. On that note, from thewatchers.org, 6 months worth of rain hits the Black Sea coast of eastern Romania, causing severe flooding. Question, did Romania do something to anger the Matrix controllers, not towing the line fast enough? And another from watchers.org, death toll rises to 28 as heaviest rains in 50 years batter India. And they always try to insinuate it's happened before, and people think, well, it can't be that bad if it happened before. And that is exactly the goal of media now. Not to alarm the herd and panic them before the moment of impact. Was this a shot across India's bow? And keep in mind, there is no natural weather at this point. All is tainted. Epic drought deluge scenarios, the hallmark of climate engineering operations. It's not to say that we wouldn't have both without climate engineering. Of course we would, but when the entire planet climate system has been totally and completely derailed and disrupted, how can we possibly say that any weather event anywhere would have happened at that place, in that time, in that way, if climate engineering hadn't completely disrupted the global weather pattern? So think about it in that context. And that's very important to think about it that way. Without climate engineering derailing the entire global climate system, can we say that any particular weather event would have happened in that place, at that time, in that way? If not for climate engineering disrupting the whole system, the answer is no. It's no. Every single event becomes a potential liability to those in power, those participating in these programs, and that is why in the 800-page Senate document posted at geoengineeringwatch.org, it specifically calls for blanket legal immunity for anyone and everyone involved in these programs. I wonder why. Does that ring a bell for other industries that have been granted blanket immunity from liability? Connect the dots. What about this from CNBC? Water shortages are likely brewing future wars with several flashpoints across the globe. Climate engineering, drought deluge scenarios, again, on top of an already badly damaged planet. Control the weather, control food supplies, control populations, blame it on nature. Moving on. How about those constant ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure heat domes? Many don't associate this with climate engineering, but it's a core part of it. If you don't know what an ionosphere heater installation is or what it does, think HAARP in Alaska, acronym HAARP. And for a start, look up the term ionosphere heater. Objective research into these atmospheric weapons of mass destruction is absolutely essential. Our collective futures depend on exposing and stopping this intentional toxic intervention in the planet's life support systems, and it's much more than just climate engineering. They can disperse anything they want into the clouds, and likely are. Think about that. And if you don't think those in power would do such a thing, I again cite a 1977 Washington Post article and other sources as well, that even that far back, U.S. military disclosed it had already conducted no less than 239 open-air biological tests on innocent, unknowing populations. Business as usual. Here's another from the Washington Post. After another brutally hot summer in the U.S., not just the U.S., but let's continue. These 6 things stood out, the Post says. Heat waves every week, punishing heat on both coasts. The nation's hottest cities had their hottest summer ever. All-time heat records galore, record heat from border to border, and unforgiving heat and humidity in Florida. Okay, let's stop there. 6 points from the Washington Post. So am I saying that all the heat is just a result of climate engineering? Absolutely not. And many mistakenly still attribute me as concluding that. I've never, ever said that. How could that possibly be so? How could the planet only feel the effects of climate engineering and nothing else we do to it? That's patently false. And the more we recognize and acknowledge reality accurately, the more credible we are in this fight, and the more likely we are to be able to expose and halt climate engineering and allow the planet to respond on its own to the damage done. And we will then have to address the other forms of damage, without question. And that list is very long indeed. But we must stop the intentional intervention with the climate system first. That's the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat at this moment in time. Greatest and most immediate threat we collectively face, again, because it's biological warfare as well, short of nuclear cataclysm. And about the heat, industrialized, militarized, so-called society is by its very nature a heat engine, burning its way through over 100 million barrels of hydrocarbon fuel every single day, 26 million tons of coal every single day, cutting down forests, paving the planet. You get the idea. But again, to use weather as a covert weapon of war, on top of all the other forms of damage, that's truly a death sentence for all of us. From the Weather Channel Climate Engineering Cover-Up Agency, it's not in your head. This summer was more humid. Remember, I've cited this for a decade and a half on this at geoengineeringwatch.org and almost a decade on this particular broadcast, Global Alert News, that for every degree C of warming, the atmosphere holds 7% more moisture. It must rain more on a warming planet. The laws of physics say so, but it's not. Why not? Because climate engineering in many regions is, we believe, trying to reduce the atmospheric RH buildup because greenhouse gases include water. Water is a greenhouse gas. But water also makes clouds. And this intentional intervention in the climate system with these atmospheric particles, toxic particles, have reduced natural lower level cumulus clouds, the kind of clouds that actually cool, the kind that float over your head and you instantly feel the temperature drop. How can reducing that kind of cloud cover possibly slow down the warming of the planet? Answer, it can't. And the higher level particulate clouds, toxic particulate clouds that are so obvious, that it's so blatantly obvious when you look at the sky and you see a lower level cumulus cloud and this overstory of toxic, filthy looking sprayed aerosol cloud. How can people not recognize this? I understand that a young child or young kids that have never seen real skies, but how do so many that are old enough to remember the true blue skies and brilliant white clouds, how do they not take notice of these atrocities? It's absolutely mind-numbing to me. So back to the increasing humidity, it is causing what is known as the wet bulb effect. And that's a method of reading temperatures which determines the point at which the human body cannot perspire and cool itself. And that's when the temperatures become very, very dangerous. And the heat indexes are climbing extraordinarily high. I'll get to some of that later in this broadcast. Temperatures well over 150 degrees. That's heat index. Again, feels like temperature. We don't see much of that in the news while we're seeing scripted political theater day in and day out, or what other events they manage to probably orchestrate whenever they need to. From the Arctic News Climate Engineering Denial website, this cataclysmic alignment threatens climate catastrophe. That sounds bad, doesn't it? This says high sunspots could line up with an upcoming El Nino, with a further forcing by short-term variables in a cataclysmic alignment that could push the temperature enough to cause dramatic sea ice loss in the Arctic. That's already happening, resulting in runaway temperature rise by 2026. First, whatever cosmological events there are that may be adding to the dire equation we now face, as I've stated countless times, there can be no legitimate discussion of climate anything from any perspective without first and foremost acknowledging and addressing the single greatest climate disruption factor of all, global climate engineering operations, which this source refuses to do, refuses to acknowledge. And even though the head of this source contacted me at geoengineeringwatch.org and stated they realized climate engineering was going on and they were going to disclose it that same week they contacted me. Have they? No. Were they warned? Perhaps. Chuck Norris was warned, was working with Chuck and his wife Gina. Their pastor came to Reading to see me personally. We did several articles together on WND and then completely went off the radar. Chuck went completely off the radar, and we have a mutual friend who told me he was absolutely warned to stay away from this issue. The same happened with Merle Haggard. I had a very long meeting with Merle and many other communications, and he told me that he and Willie Nelson were going to try to stage some kind of event to bring attention to this issue. Did it ever happen? No. Off the radar again. Merle passed sometime thereafter. Another dead end. And I could go on and on about similar circumstances in this arena. And when a fire begins to burn, it seems it gets stomped out very quickly. And it's up to all of us to be able to power past that point, to start so many spot fires of awareness and stoke them so high that they merge together into a bonfire that can't be put out. And we're running out of time. We must build this bonfire of awareness so high and so bright that the planet and its people wake up to what's occurring, that we cause a shockwave around the globe that overturns the current reality. And though that does not mean by any stretch that our problems are over, they're just beginning, it means at least the fur will fly and we are heading in the right direction. And that's worth fighting for. But about this science report's conclusion that we may face a runaway planetary incineration scenario by 2026, that part is wrong. There's not could, may, might. Dozens of climate feedback loops have already been triggered. We are in a runaway climate collapse scenario now. If you don't believe it, you will soon. Wait and see. And if climate engineering can be exposed and stopped, none of us know. No one can know how profound the planet's life support response might be. We can't know, but we must find out. The planet must be freed from this intentional interference, not just the atmospheric aerosol dispersions, but the frequency transmissions used to manipulate those dispersions, all of which destroying the ozone layer, disrupting the hydrological cycle, contaminating everything on the planet. Each of those factors, an existential threat by itself. And all of it's happening at once, along with all the other forms of anthropogenic damage to the planet. We are truly painting ourselves into a very, very dark corner. Biggest and most important leap we can make in the right direction is to expose and halt the insanity in our skies, and that would drag so much to the surface with it. The public would then realize what their so-called leaders have done to them without their knowledge or consent, and this is certainly not the only issue in which that is the case, is it? Is there a way to slow it down enough so that some might make it through what's unfolding? That may very well depend on what each of us chooses to do or not to do with this knowledge. We're the ones we've been waiting for, as I've stated so many times. That's the words of the Hopi elders. We are the ones we have been waiting for. With all that in mind, why, or should I say how, do we have this headline from AccuWeather.com? Noticing trees are changing color early? ? They say some trees are already changing colors in parts of the United States, while others have started shedding leaves with fall just a couple weeks away. Trees changing color early? That must mean it's getting colder sooner, right? Answer, not so much. Only on the surface and only in regions that are being pounded by chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding operations. The constant extreme hail and hurricane-force surface winds are a glaring red flag on this front. Please search the engineering winter section to find out about patented processes of chemical ice nucleation operations. And all of this has very detrimental effects on the foliage and the flora as a whole. In fact, in fall rains in Northern California, and we've seen the same scenario in many other parts of the country and the world, after specific fall rains, we see leaves die and hang on the trees within days of those rains. That is not nature. We paid many thousands of dollars for testing with the University of Minnesota to determine if some sort of defoliant, something to force the trees into drought, deciduous trees only. This is not like dioxin to kill everything. We're talking about specific synthesized plant hormone defoliants for deciduous trees that force those trees into dormancy. And farmers in the Central Valley and many other regions have been using these type of defoliants because if they don't force their trees into dormancy because it's not getting cold enough, they won't produce anything. And in fact, most plants or orchards are not producing nearly what they should, if anything at all, at this point anyway. But when you see trees that have dead leaves, deciduous trees that aren't dead but have dead leaves hanging on them after the fall rains and hang there all winter unless the wind blows them off, that's not nature. That tree did not drop that leaf on its own. Why would they do this? To create a psychological perception of a change of season on a planet that's in total meltdown, complete meltdown. Would they be this desperate? Of course they're this desperate. Do they have this technology? They were defoliating jungles 50 plus years ago, 60 years ago, almost. Of course they have this technology. Do they care about this kind of contamination? Of course they don't. Spreading toxic sewer sludge in our farm fields and likely coal fly ash in our airs, you don't think they would spray some chemical, hormonal, synthesized defoliants to force trees into dormancy so people think, oh, the fall's here because all the leaves on the trees just died and are hanging there? That's not normal. It's not nature. Again, I cite peer-reviewed science study, which I already covered again on this broadcast. There's not an uncontaminated drop of rain on the entire planet, from the North Pole to the South Pole and everywhere in between. PFAS forever chemicals, and that's a very long list of chemicals. I believe there's something in the order of 15,000 chemicals in that category, if I'm not mistaken. We have no idea of knowing the totality of what they're dropping on us, which is being absorbed into virtually everything. Is it any wonder that everything is dying? Is it any wonder that 80 to 90% of Earth's insect populations are dead, terrestrial and aquatic, right now? And the UV is so intense you can't stand in it. This week in Northern California, after we had our flash cool down a little over a week ago, we went from the hundreds to 49 degrees where I live and right back to the hundreds. That's not nature either. It's chemical ice nucleation. That flash cool down convinced so many people that, yes, we've just been through the summer from hell, not just weeks, but months of absolutely hellish heat and weather, day and night, but one little cool down and they forget everything. Oh, well, it can't be that bad because look, it just flash cool down. Chemical cool down, the air stunk. It absolutely stunk when that moisture was coming in. It looked completely unnatural. Skies looked totally unnatural. And eventually some drizzles start to fall and then it picks up, and you could hear where I live in a quiet location. You can hear the aircraft going over back and forth and back and forth. There's no flight paths over me. I don't live at the end of the LAX runway, but there they are. And we've tested this material over and over, packed with climate engineering elements, all of them toxic, plus synergistic toxicity. We are a massive physics experiment, which is going very bad already. It's going to get a lot worse. From the UK Guardian, dangerously hot weather to roast U.S. West as brutal summer conditions continue. California, Nevada, and Arizona swelter in what could be the most intense heat wave of an already blazing season. Searing temperatures will roast the U.S. West Coast again this week as brutal heat waves could bring some of the highest temperatures of the summer so far. Excessive heat warnings were in effect across parts of Southern California, Arizona, and Nevada, affecting tens of millions of people. The harsh weather was scheduled to peak beginning on Wednesday and lasting into the weekend. The Guardian continues, the heat wave will add to the pain of what has already been a devastating summer across the region. The baking heat primed the West, they say, for an explosive fire season. Link this back to what is setting the template for these fires to burn with such ferocity. Just went over all that. And again, this, in the case of aluminum nanoparticles in the precipitation, which means it's in the air column, that's an incendiary dust coating the forest foliage, forest floors, and everything else. An incendiary dust. Back to the blanket spraying over the Paradise smoke canopy. Was that an incendiary dust as well? We couldn't test in that particular scenario, but every other test shows the same. So why would we think otherwise? What are they doing and why? And anyone that thinks this must be for our own good or they wouldn't do it, please, that kind of denial is getting very, very old at this point. Those in power see populations, especially the U.S. population, many of which are heavily armed, as a rapidly increasing liability. Do you really think they want you here? When they've stated on the record they want to thin the herd down to about 500 million, that's a big drop. That's a drop of about 7.5 billion. Anybody volunteering? Those in power should be the first to walk the plank. They have done the most to create this very dark corner that we now find ourselves in, but I remind that they could not have done what they have done or continue to do without the active or passive participation of the majority population. That simple. We've seen the enemy, and he is us. About the drought monitor lies right now, everything's a lie. Climate-wise, everything's a lie. And no, that doesn't mean it's not as bad as they've said. It's way worse than anything we've been officially told. And about the drought monitor that shows the lowest designation of drought where I live in Northern California, what a blatant, glaring lie. The fuel moistures are the lowest they have ever been. My ponds have dropped farther than they ever have. Soils are drier than they've ever been. 10 feet down, there's not a stitch of moisture. We've tested. And yet they show the minimum designation of drought because people see that's the official chart, so it must be okay. Yeah, sure, everything's dying, and it's the driest, hottest, most intense UV we've ever experienced, but it must be fine because officially the chart says so. So how could it be otherwise, right? Safe and effective. Yeah, let's plug that into the equation too. From AccuWeather, scorching late summer heat to bring highest temperatures of the year so far to Los Angeles. The position of the high-pressure area, the report says, aka engineered high-pressure heat dome, will create offshore breezes which will help to push the warmth toward the beaches. For the record, engineering atmospheric pressure zones allows the geoengineers to steer atmospheric moisture flows and thus weather systems. Many layers to this equation. From CBS News, Phoenix hits 100 degrees Fahrenheit for a record 100 straight days. The city hit its 100 straight day with at least 100-degree temperatures, far surpassing the record of 76 days in a row. Yeah, that's a big leap, isn't it? Record high temperatures are being broken by 8-10 degrees at times. That should alarm the hell out of everybody. From azcentral.com, summer 2024 ends as the hottest on record in Phoenix, breaking the old mark set just last year. The high temperature hasn't dropped below 100 degrees since May 26, and listen carefully to the next excerpt from this report. A high-pressure atmospheric system that traps heat below has impacted most of the Southwest throughout the summer. That's not nature. Moving on from NBC News, even desert plants known for their resilience are burning and dying in the heat. Agave and saguaro cacti, both heat-tolerant and drought-resistant, are suffering as climate change makes heat waves more frequent and intense. It's not just the ambient temperature. It's the extraordinarily intense UV, including UVC, and climate engineering is the single greatest ozone-destroying factor of all, by far. Cactus, even in Northern California, where I live, formerly lush forest in Northern California, I've planted cactus here specifically, and it is dying. In what was formerly a lush forest, along with all the fir trees also dying. From other parts of the world, UK Guardian, fire services warn of likely early start to Australia's fire season. They're already telling us the schedule weather. From DW.com, Greek islands fighting water shortages with desalination. Bad idea. Creates an immense amount of toxic waste. Chile tried this and wiped out their ocean around their desalination plant. Bottom line, the cure for environmental destruction and stupidity isn't more environmental destruction and stupidity. From the UK Guardian, Japan swelters through the hottest summer, while parts of China log warmest August on record. Climate scientists have already predicted 2024 will be the hottest year ever, surpassing last year. From ScienceNews.org, summer-like heat is scorching the southern hemisphere even in winter. Temperatures just hit a record-breaking 107 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 41.6 degrees C, in winter in Australia. Globally, average nighttime temperatures are also increasing even faster than daytime temperatures. I've been over that in this broadcast so many times, twice as fast to be exact. A phenomenon scientists call asymmetric warming. That nighttime warming is a big factor in pushing the planet's average temperature upward, contributing to its 14-month streak of record-breaking heat. Where's all the coming ice age, planet cooling that we still hear from so many sources and sites? Please, look at the data. Look around you. Look what's happening. And please correct your compass heading. Credibility means everything. All of us are needed in this battle. Climate engineering is completely decimating the planet, adding more fuel to the fire of the already unfolding climate collapse, full-blown meltdown. That's exactly what's happening. Further fueled by climate engineering. From Severe Weather Europe, September 2024 starts with record-breaking heat wave. Unusually hot weather continues for another week. They say September starts with new monthly records across Central Europe. These temperatures are extremely hot and historically very early for September. What is a heat dome? They ask, and why does it bring long-lasting heat waves and excessive temperatures? Question mark. They say an omega blocking pattern establishes, wait for it, heat dome and maintains the heat wave underneath. The Severe Weather Europe report then states there have been thousands of record-breaking high temperatures and the temperature anomalies have often been off the charts. Yes, ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure heat domes. The air underneath is generally stagnant. Nighttime temperatures don't cool much, if at all, because the heat can't rise as it should and would if man wasn't playing God with the planet's life support systems. You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 474. 474 weeks in a row. I've never missed a week. September 7th, 2024. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News is brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations, known as geoengineering. Recordings of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News report can be found on the homepage of Geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. I wish to express my deepest gratitude to all those that have stood with me in this all-important battle. Team effort. It's the only way forward. If you're on our email list, please put us on your email contact book so that our mailouts don't go to the spam file. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, which fully exposes the climate engineering atrocities, now with over 25 million views on YouTube. The best way to share is by circulating the direct link to The Dimming by email directly from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship, which is getting more brutal by the day. When viewing our YouTube of The Dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and comment, all of which helps us to circulate critically important data to a much wider audience. Again, about reaching those that still aren't looking up and seeing what's happening in our skies, one way. Start a conversation with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials. Again, they can be found on our homepage. Our only goal, to provide activists what they need to effectively move this fight forward. Our high-quality printed materials, shocking images, we pass on for less than our cost of producing and shipping. I live for the day when this insanity is fully exposed once and for all. We have Geoengineering Watch hoodies, Geoengineering Watch shirts. Photos of both are on our homepage. We have scannable business cards and bumper stickers, all effective tools to help strike up a conversation on this most dire issue of climate engineering. Again, reaching a critical mass, the only way forward in this fight. If we can expose it, we can stop it from the inside out. Again, to all those that are steadfastly committed to exposing and halting the climate engineering insanity, you have my deepest gratitude now and forever. Pressing on from the Washington Post, you just lived through the most humid summer on record. And for the record, it was also the hottest summer on record in countless locations. And in other regions, chemical ice nucleation, cloud seeding surface cool downs, again, complete with baseball and softball size hail, which is now apparently the norm. From NBC News, more climate engineering cover-up. Listen to this. Follow-up story. Touched on this in a previous broadcast. Hailstones may get bigger, they say, as the climate warms. That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? The ice is going to get bigger in a warming climate. And no, it's not just about convection, which they want you to think. It's about chemical ice nucleation. They say this is going to bring higher insurance costs, not for many, because many are being canceled because of this. Same with wildfires, or firestorms, I should say, in the West, canceled. And are they willing to address climate engineering? No. I contacted officials high up in State Farm. They didn't want to talk about it. Are they getting money through the back door to keep their mouths shut? Because otherwise, certainly an insurance company that's taking massive losses would say something, wouldn't they? Don't care. Everybody's bought, sold, and paid for, protecting their paychecks and pensions till the brutal, bitter end, which draws very near. The report from NBC states hail has caused higher damage costs in the U.S. than hurricanes and floods put together. Research suggests, they say, that climate change will make hailstones larger. The likelihood of smaller, less damaging hailstones will decrease. They certainly know, don't they? Why don't the so-called weather experts admit to chemical ice nucleation operations? Again, to do so would be a very bad career decision at minimum. From Reuters, the new headline on the ongoing disaster in South America. Amazon River levels fall due to lack of rain, hurting navigation. Following last year's drought, barges were prevented from using parts of the Amazon River. And the outlook for this year, they say, is even worse. Dredging has started on critical points. That's going to help a lot, right? Just keep digging deeper holes. Destroy the river basin habitats along with the rest of the forest. Across the Amazon region, the report states communities are facing isolation due to lower river navigability. Residents cannot travel to buy food, and crops are being harmed, besides the fish that are killed when streams dry up. This year, the waters of the Pacific have not cooled as expected, which combined with the lack of rain in 2023 has led to a catastrophic situation on the Amazon. Amazon fire update, 45,000 fires this year so far, something like that. Let's press on. Running out of time from the BaltimoreBanner.com. Why are there so many dead fish in Baltimore's Inner Harbor? Question mark. There's going to be dead fish. There already is all over the world. Over 500 dead zones expanding by the day. We're hurtling toward what's known as Canfield Ocean. Look that one up. Oceans die, we die. From SciTech Daily. NASA spots a surprising series of disturbances shaking Antarctica's sky. Could that be something to do with the ionosphere heater that's located in Antarctica that no one wants to talk about? From phys.org, Arctic heat waves linked to sea ice loss. New study reveals. What an amazing hypothesis that heat is linked to ice melting. How profound is that? I wonder how many degrees it took to figure that one out. But don't worry about how horribly bad everything is everywhere, and it's getting even worse by the day. So-called technology is coming to save the day again, and this time it's regarding coastal erosion. The following headline reporters from MSN.com and others. Yes, more mind-numbing stupidity from the so-called science community. Here it is. Scientists want to zap coastlines with electricity. They say beaches are disappearing because of climate change and coastal erosion. This poses a risk to coastal communities. Now scientists may have uncovered an unconventional solution, zapping the waterfronts with electricity. This method could create a strong natural barrier against erosion and offer protection without... Really? You're going to turn the beachfront into a magic shell like sea creatures make for themselves? That's where they're going with this. Why not just simply ask the Tooth Fairy to help, or Santa Claus, or the Easter Bunny? It's mind-numbing, the incredible stupidity from the so-called science community that won't admit to the climate engineering elephant in the sky, but they come up with things like this. More bad news. This from ABC Australia. Bees starving for pollen as native flowers fail to bloom. It's been dry flowering. There's actually been no nectar or pollen, the report states. Already some of the hives have been abandoned. More will likely follow. No pollinators, no people soon after. Is the writing on the wall becoming clearer? Let's keep going. From firstpost.com. At 82.2 degrees C, has Iran just recorded Earth's highest heat index? Question mark. That translates to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Feels like temperature. How many Americans know how hot it is in places like Iran where they are being baked under a high-pressure heat dome? Is that any surprise? We had the leaders of Iran on the floor of the UN stating emphatically on film, on the record, that NATO was waging weather warfare against them. How many Americans know that? And we wonder why these people don't like us very much? Why would they? To those that believe that they will escape Iran's fate, perhaps because they believe the planet isn't actually mortally damaged, or perhaps they believe the controllers care about them more than they do the Iranians, and that chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding will allow them to live happily ever after. Here's some sobering bad news. Nearly 10 years ago, when I began this broadcast, I cited the following statistical data: that the planet was warming at the statistical equivalent of the thermal energy or heat contained in 4 to 5 Hiroshima-sized nuclear bombs per second. The majority of that heat has so far been absorbed by the oceans, but that is changing rapidly. And yes, there is only one ocean. It's all connected. By 2020, with climate intervention operations further fueling the fire, along with the carbon fuel carnival, the heat buildup had reached the thermal energy equivalent of 10 Hiroshima bombs per second. Today, all available data indicates that we are at the heat equivalent of 13 Hiroshima-sized nuclear bombs per second. Please don't believe me. Please actually investigate this data. This can't be hidden or effectively denied for much longer. The global controllers know that the current paradigm can no longer be effectively maintained. And they will soon likely play much bigger cards from many directions. In the distant past, for the earliest humans, it took tens of thousands of years for the population to double. And now, with our numbers already in the billions, it has taken only decades to double into billions more. How can that trend possibly continue? Most especially on a rapidly dying planet. Answer: it can't, and it won't. The manipulators of the Matrix are acutely aware of this fact, and to admit to this fact is not to agree with the controllers. It's simply to admit to a fact. And exactly what do the controllers plan to do about this fact? Again, consider this quote from former U.S. presidential advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski. He said, "In early times, it was easier to control 1 million people than to kill 1 million. Today, Brzezinski says it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. Ponder that from a former U.S. presidential advisor. And the current controllers of it all believe that it is not only their right, but actually their duty to decide who will live a bit longer and who won't. How can we alter the current paradigm? By stepping up to the plate and doing our part, given our individual circumstances. No one is in a position to do nothing, and we need to start by stopping what's happening in our skies. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org to learn specific details on what you can do to help this fight forward. And we have that link, so I don't have to go into that on every single broadcast, but I do mention that link on every single broadcast. Please find it and share it so that we can play chess more effectively, which is going to be essential if we're to make a difference at this late hour. I can't stress with enough urgency, we don't have much time left if we remain on the current course. Deeds are eternal, not flesh. Share credible data from a credible source. Make your voice heard. Make every day count. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington from Geoengineeringwatch.org.